Hurry before Dad returns, son. A true infidelity story. It was a peaceful evening, the sun just beginning to set behind the hills, casting a warm orange glow over our quiet neighborhood. I was in the kitchen preparing dinner as the soft hum of the radio played in the background. My son, Eric, had just returned home from college for the weekend. There was a calm, comforting energy in the house, the kind of peacefulness that comes with familiarity. Eric had grown up so quickly. It felt like just yesterday he was a boy, following me around the house, asking endless questions about life. Now, at 21, he was no longer the little boy I remembered, but a young man. Strong, confident, and at times unknowingly distant. The dynamic between us had shifted as he matured, and it was something I was still getting used to. Dinner was ready, and I called him from the living room. As we sat down at the table, I noticed the way he looked at me. Different, intense in a way that made me pause. I brushed it off at first, thinking it was my imagination. We talked about his classes, his friends, and how much he missed home. But the way he spoke, the way his eyes lingered on mine longer than usual, made me feel something I couldn't quite put into words. After dinner, we decided to watch a movie together, something we used to do all the time before he left for college. The living room felt cozier than usual, the dim lighting and soft cushions making it a perfect setting for a quiet night in. I couldn't remember the last time we had such a peaceful evening together. As the movie played, I found myself glancing at him more than I should have, noticing the way he had grown into himself. He was no longer the child I had raised, but a man. And then, just as I was beginning to feel a strange sense of unease about the thoughts crossing my mind, he shifted closer to me on the couch. At first, I thought it was innocent, but then his hand brushed against mine. A spark shot through me. Something electric, something I knew I shouldn't feel. I pulled my hand away quickly, startled by the intensity of the moment. "What's wrong, Mom?" he asked, his voice soft, almost concerned. I looked at him, my heart racing, unsure of what to say. "Nothing, sweetie. Just tired. That's all," I replied, trying to dismiss the feeling and hoping he didn't notice the tension between us. But I knew something had changed in that moment, something we couldn't ignore. The line between mother and son had blurred, and even though neither of us had crossed it, the air was thick with unspoken thoughts. We sat there in silence, the movie playing in the background, but neither of us was paying attention anymore. I got up, telling him I needed to go to bed early, but as I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between us. As I lay in bed that night, my mind raced. I knew I couldn't let this feeling grow. I had to keep my distance, for both our sakes, but deep down, I wasn't sure how. The next morning, I woke up feeling unsettled. The events of the previous night played over and over in my mind. I tried to shake the feeling, convincing myself that it had all been in my head. I was his mother. Nothing more, nothing less. I loved him deeply, but not in a way that could ever be misconstrued. I was being irrational, I told myself. Eric was already up by the time I came downstairs, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee. He greeted me with a smile as if nothing had happened. Maybe it really had been nothing. Just an odd moment that only I had noticed. I decided to push it from my mind, at least for now. "Morning," I said, forcing a smile and trying to sound as normal as possible. "Morning, Mom," he replied, his voice casual and easy. I was thinking about going for a hike later. "Want to join me?" A hike. It had been ages since we'd done anything like that together. I hesitated for a moment, unsure if I should spend more time alone with him after the way I had felt last night. But then I reminded myself, it was just a mother and son spending time together. There was nothing wrong with that. "Sure," I said. "It sounds nice." Later that afternoon, we drove to a nearby trail, a place we had gone many times when he was younger. The air was crisp, the sky a brilliant blue, and for a moment, everything felt normal. We walked side by side, talking about nothing in particular. Old memories, his plans for the future, the usual small talk. I found myself laughing, feeling more at ease with him, thinking maybe I had overreacted the night before. But as we walked further along the trail, there were moments where our conversation would pause, leaving a lingering silence that felt heavier than it should. At one point, as we reached a clearing with a beautiful view of the valley below, Eric stopped walking and turned to me. "You've always been there for me, Mom," he said, his voice soft but serious. "I don't know what I'd do without you." There was something about the way he said it that caught me off guard, a vulnerability in his tone that made my heart ache. I smiled, trying to lighten the mood. "Well, you won't have to worry about that anytime soon." I joked, "I'm not going anywhere." He didn't laugh. Instead, he took a step closer, his eyes locking onto mine. "No, I mean it," he continued. "You've always been more than just my mom. You've been everything." I froze. The words hung in the air, heavy and loaded with meaning I wasn't ready to face. I searched his face for some sign that he was just being sentimental, that this was just an innocent moment of affection. But there was something in his eyes, something that made my heart race again, just like the night before. "Eric," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "you know how much I love you, right?" "Of course," he replied, stepping even closer. "I love you too, more than you realize." My pulse quickened. This wasn't how a mother and son were supposed to talk, to look at each other. My mind screamed at me to step back, to put some distance between us, but my body felt frozen in place. "I think we should head back," I said, my voice shaky. "It's getting late." But before I could turn away, he reached out and gently took my hand. The touch was innocent enough, but the way he held on, the way his thumb slowly brushed against my skin, made my stomach twist in a way I couldn't ignore. "Mom," he said softly, his voice filled with something I couldn't quite name. I don't know how to say this, but I've been feeling something. Something I shouldn't. And I think you felt it, too." Panic surged through me. I pulled my hand away, taking a step back, my heart pounding in my chest. "Eric, stop," I said, my voice trembling. "You don't mean that. You're confused." He looked at me, his expression a mix of confusion and hurt. "I'm not confused, Mom. I know how I feel." "No," I said, shaking my head. "This isn't right. You're my son. We can't." I couldn't even finish the sentence. The words felt too dangerous, too heavy to speak out loud. Eric took a deep breath, his face clouded with emotion. I know it's not right, but I can't help how I feel. And I don't think you can either." Tears welled up in my eyes as I struggled to keep my composure. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. I had to stop this before it went any further, before we crossed a line we could never uncross. "I'm your mother," I said, my voice breaking, "and I love you, but not like that. I can't. We can't." The words hung between us, thick and suffocating. I could see the pain in his eyes, the way his shoulders slumped in defeat. He nodded slowly, looking down at the ground as if ashamed. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I didn't mean to. I didn't want to make you uncomfortable." I swallowed hard, trying to push down the overwhelming mix of emotions swirling inside me. "It's okay," I said softly, though I wasn't sure if it really was. "Let's just go home." The drive home was suffocatingly quiet. Eric didn't say a word, and neither did I. The weight of what had been set on the trail hung heavily between us, making every passing second feel agonizingly long. I kept my eyes on the road, my mind racing as I tried to process what had just happened. I couldn't believe the words that had come out of his mouth, the feelings he had confessed. It was as though everything I thought I knew about our relationship had been flipped upside down. When we finally pulled into the driveway, Eric muttered something about going to his room. I didn't stop him. As he disappeared up the stairs, I collapsed onto the couch, my body trembling with the emotions I had been holding back since that moment on the trail. I didn't know how to make sense of any of it. He was my son, my baby boy. But he wasn't a boy anymore, and it was becoming terrifyingly clear that our relationship had taken on a complexity that neither of us had expected. I wanted to believe that his feelings were just a phase, something fleeting that would pass with time. But the way he had looked at me, the way his hand had lingered on mine, told me otherwise. A part of me felt guilty, like maybe I had done something wrong. Maybe I had been too affectionate, too close over the years. But that wasn't right, was it? Mothers were supposed to love their sons, to nurture them, to be there for them. That's all I had ever done. But now everything felt tainted by the strange tension that had grown between us, and I didn't know how to fix it. I spent the rest of the day trying to avoid him, keeping myself busy with chores and anything that could distract me from the confusion I felt. By the time evening came, I was emotionally drained. I didn't want to confront what had happened, but I knew I couldn't avoid it forever. Eric and I couldn't go on like this, pretending everything was fine when it so clearly wasn't. That night, after I had spent hours tossing and turning in bed, I heard a knock on my door. My heart sank. I knew it was him. "Mom, can I come in?" Eric's voice was soft, almost hesitant. I hesitated, my mind screaming at me to say no, to create some distance between us. But I knew I couldn't keep avoiding him. I had to face this, no matter how uncomfortable it made me. "Come in," I said quietly, sitting up in bed and pulling the covers up around me as if they could somehow shield me from the emotional storm that was about to unfold. Eric stepped inside, looking as conflicted and unsure as I felt. He stood at the edge of the room for a moment, not quite knowing what to do with himself. After a few seconds, he sat down on the edge of the bed, but kept his distance. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "I shouldn't have said what I said earlier. I don't know what came over me." I nodded slowly, trying to find the right words. "I know this is confusing," I said. "But what happened earlier? That can't happen again, Eric. We have to be careful. This isn't how things are supposed to be." "I know," he whispered, his eyes downcast. "But it's so hard, Mom. I don't know why I feel like this. I've tried to push it away, but it just keeps coming back." His words struck something deep within me. I felt an overwhelming sense of sadness for him, for both of us, really. This wasn't a situation I had ever imagined myself being in. But there we were, trapped in a web of emotions that neither of us knew how to untangle. "I'm your mother," I said again, my voice gentle but firm. "That's all I can ever be. You know that, right?" He looked at me, his eyes filled with pain, but he nodded. "I know," he said. I don't want to lose you." "You're not going to lose me," I assured him. "But we have to set boundaries, Eric. This is dangerous territory." For a moment, there was silence between us. The tension from earlier in the day still lingered, but there was also an unspoken understanding that things couldn't continue the way they were. We both knew it, even if neither of us wanted to fully acknowledge it. "Maybe it's best if you go back to school tomorrow," I suggested gently. "I think we both need some space to clear our heads." Eric nodded slowly, though I could see the sadness in his eyes. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Maybe you're right." The next morning, I watched as he packed his things, the air between us thick with unresolved emotions. I wanted to hug him, to tell him that everything would be okay, but I couldn't bring myself to do it, not after everything that had happened. When he finally left, the house felt emptier than it had in years. I sat on the couch, staring out the window, trying to process everything. I knew we had both made the right choice by putting some distance between us, but that didn't make it any easier. The relationship between a mother and son was supposed to be simple, pure, but ours had become something far more complicated, something that neither of us knew how to handle. As the days passed, I tried to settle back into my routine, but it wasn't the same. The house felt too quiet without Eric, and I found myself thinking about him more than I should have. I wanted to believe that the distance would help, that it would give us both the space we needed to sort out our feelings. But deep down, I knew that things would never go back to the way they were before. Something had shifted between us, something we couldn't undo, and I wasn't sure what the future held for us anymore. Thank you for watching and listening to my story. Don't forget to subscribe for more videos like this.